Hi everyone, George here from Locked on Art, and in this episode of Quick Builds I'm going to be building the Soviet light tank BT-5. This kit, being from Zvezda, is in the 1:100 scale. Now, this being a light tank, the kit is very small, and in fact there's only one sprue and there is only 7 pieces on it. Now, there are some nice details on there, and with it being such a small scale, there are some noticeable things missing, which I will have to scratch build. And one notable feature on the tyres was the tread and little holes that ran all the way around the tyre. So I have started adding them with a 0.3mm drill bit. So I've completed one side, and as you can see, it's significantly changed the appearance. There's quite a bit of cleanup to do, and especially here on the tracks. There's a rather large seam line here on the turret that's going to have to be removed. So that looks a bit better now, but unfortunately I had to remove the strip that was on the side here, so I'll just have to put that back on. And as well as that, I also want to put on a couple of headlights. As well as these little photo etch hooks that I've just made out of some spare photo etch. So there is the basic tank, and I'm not going to put the wheels on just yet. I'm going to paint them before I assemble them. Okay, so for priming the model, I'm just going to treat it with a little Vallejo Mecha primer, and I'm just going to use it straight from the bottle. So for the main body of the tank, I'm going to be using this Russian green 4BO kit from Vallejo. I'm just starting off with that 4BO base coat, just doing a few light coats with that. So next I'm using camouflage black green, and I'm going to paint that into the deep recesses of the tank. So the next colour, the Russian green, is going to be a lighter tone for the recessed areas. Now I'm going to use green on the larger and more exposed panels. So for the highlights, I'm just using light green. I'm adding a drop of paint retarder and a few drops of tap water. Now for the tracks, I think in this instance it's definitely going to be easier to paint the whole thing a black grey and then colour in the wheels green afterwards. So at this stage of the painting, I'm going to seal that work in with Tamiya's TS13 clear gloss, and then I'll be able to start the weathering process. I'm now adding an oil filter to the tank. This will blend together some of the previous steps and also brighten up the paint scheme a little bit. I'm just using some basic green and yellow oil paint with a little bit of raw sienna mixed in. So now I'm using a dark brown pin wash, and what this does is it's going to bring out all of those small details. And I repeat this step 2 or 3 times so I can build up that colour. So once you're finished, it may look quite a mess. Just take a clean brush dipped in spirits and you can start to brush away the excess. What it does is it drives the remaining paint back into those crevices. So at this stage I'm going to add some chipping to the tank, and what I'm going to do first is a technique called speckling. I have some white and green basic oil paint and I have heavily diluted it. This is going to act as random worn and distressed paint. So of course this is a random effect, so if there's any unwanted splotches or something you're not happy with, you can just clean it off with a bit of white spirits. So for the second stage of speckling, I have the same mixture of paint, but it is less diluted, and that's going to create more refined chipping. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to acrylic now. So I'm going to do some really fine detailed chipping and scratching, and I'm using the highlight light green from the Russian 4BO set. Now I'm going to be going over a lot of those areas with a black grey to simulate exposed metal underneath the worn paint. And also, while I've got the black grey out, I'm going to go ahead and colour the exhaust. And also the shovels mounted on the top. For the headlights, I'm just painting them in silver, and then once that's dry I can put a clear coat on top. For the exhaust, I'm going to be chipping it with a combination of orange rust and light rust. And for this method I'm going to be using a sponge, and I want to get rid of most of that paint. Until it starts coming out like this. And with the harder to reach areas, I'm just going to have to come in with a small brush. And I'll finish that off with some pigments later on. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of forced shadowing and grime to the tank, just further enhancing that pin wash. I've just got a mixture of black and burnt umber oil paint, and then blending it back. I'm going to concentrate on the lower hull now, and I'm going to use some pigments to replicate all the churned earth and dirt that's kicked up by the tracks. And I'm going to stick everything in place with this acrylic resin for pigments. I'm just going to start stippling on that resin. And then I'm going to start adding pigment, just alternating with different shades. I'm just adding in a wee bit of black smoke in there as well. And just to finish that off, I'm going to speckle on some light pigment diluted in white spirits. Now I'm going to use that same technique for the exhaust, just using rust tones and black smoke. For the tracks, the process is slightly simpler. I'm going to start off with a black wash. Now I'm adding on clumps of dried dust and dirt, just using some pigments thinned down in white spirit. And I'm also going to give the entire track a very light dust wash. And I'm also going to use that same wash for certain areas of the tank, mainly horizontal surfaces. In the final stage, I'm going to do some metal highlights with dark steel pigment from Vallejo. So for this, I'm using a silicon sculpting tool. I just find that it goes on much easier than with a paintbrush. So that's about it for this episode. BT-5 is finished, and being a light tank, it's one of the smallest I've made in this scale, but I still think it looks very cool. In fact, I think it's my favourite design of the Russian tanks, and I would love to revisit this tank in a larger scale in the future. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Quick Builds, and you are subscribed so you can see more episodes like this. And until next time, thanks very much for watching.